This video will give you a review of some of the most important points made in the PowerPoints for both chapters 2 and 3. The pre-Socratic Sophos. The Sophos is a wise person, and pre-Socratics are those philosophers who came before Socrates, and they are generally credited with the beginning of Western thinking, Western philosophical thinking. So the Sophos is a wise person. You'll see that contrasted with the issues brought up in chapter 3. There have been female philosophers as far back as the 3rd century BCE, and Socrates' wife was also something of a philosopher. However, they have been censored a lot by history, and unfortunately don't show up in our book much until much later. So the first Western thinkers, as it tells us here, were initially concerned with questions about nature, that is, speculating about what the world was made of and how things were ordered. They also were obsessed with looking for a common principle that is a significant term coming out of this chapter that we're about to get to, which is logos. Thales is generally credited to be the first Western philosopher, significant because he said that everything was water. He meant everything could be boiled down to water, no pun intended. And of course he was wrong, but also his thinking was really the first metaphysical thinking of its kind. Okay, so you see that explained. Anaximander was credited with coming up with the idea that everything that happened had to have a reason for happening. Again, also a fundamental underpinning of science still to this day. Philosophers, the pre-Socratics, were obsessed with the problem of change and how change could happen. The Logos is generally credited with coming out of a very famous pre-Socratic philosopher, Heraclitus, who said that there must be something underlying everything, underlying all change, that was ordering it, that was keeping it together. So logos is can mean a lot of different things in the Greek: thought, speech, meaning, etc. It can also mean reason. It is basically any type of ordering principle. Heraclitus held that only change was unchanging. In other words, change is the only constant. Since things are changing, change never goes away. It's obviously something of a circular statement, but Heraclitus was famous for setting the bar with that idea that everything is changing, and therefore change is the only thing that's always there. Parmenides came right after Heraclitus, countered him by saying that everything, instead of change, was a unity. Everything was one, and therefore he set kind of the polar opposite idea from Heraclitus. reality can't, Parmenides said that reality cannot be apprehended by the senses. Change and variety are only appearances, so they're not real. They seem to be real, but they're not. Parmenides associated being with correct thinking and not being with illusion. So, anything that doesn't work, wrong thinking is in that estimation of his simply not real. Parmenides believed that something could not. His reasoning is that when a thing becomes something else, it becomes what it is not. Therefore, it can't really do that. It is kind of a logical trick that he is playing on the world, but it is also the beginning of such attempts to use pure logic to understand the world. Zeno was a disciple, student of Parmenides, came up with several paradoxes which kind of further proved Parmenides' idea that change can't happen. His idea, including his famous arrow paradox, boiled down to the fact that even though it looks like something is moving, motion is actually impossible since the space that has to be traversed can be infinitely divided. It's really using mathematical and logical niceties to try to say you never get to where you want to go because you always have to go a portion of the way first, and that can go on to infinity. So pluralism, of which we're going to talk about this here in both chapters, is the idea that there are many realities or substances, and that the world cannot be reduced to one thing like Thales thought it was. I'm going to bump ahead to a couple of further slides. Democritus, an ancient philosopher, pre-Socratic, actually had an atomic theory, believing that things came to be when atoms combined in certain ways and then went out of existence when the atoms separated. Went further to say that something which would be developed by a lot of philosophers over the centuries is that certain perceptual qualities, such as something being sweet or sour, are actually the product of our own situation and being, rather than the product of the item. This is going to be a famous back and forth in philosophical history. Okay, there's chapter 2. So let me go ahead and bump to chapter 3. Get this in your purview here. Okay. So chapter 3 covers the sophists and emphasizes Protagoras. Sophists were a group of thinkers. Protagoras is the most famous, who came in right after the pre-Socratics and up to and soon after Socrates' time. So the idea of ethnocentrism, which was fairly developed in ancient Greece, is that people will believe or have the idea that their ways are inherently superior to all others. As you learn further in the reading, the word barbarian is from the Greek and actually means somebody who is being mocked because they were outsiders or spoke other language. So the Greeks had a problem with ethnocentrism. It was present and needs to be acknowledged. The notion in Athens of approaching Socrates' time, the education was becoming more organized and more professional. So the sophists were ready to step in and to make it follow those guidelines, and they had some ideas in that direction. We'll see. Instead of searching for the truth with a capital T, they turned their attention to human life and conduct. So they were very concerned with the behavior of people as representing truth, and that is to say, a lot of little truths. And according to Socrates, who lived at the same time as many of the sophists, and Socrates is the topic of chapter 4. He had many discussions and debates with them, and Socrates was often, it was confusing to some about whether he was a sophist or a sophos, that is, whether the sophists came to be maligned and Socrates came to be considered wiser than them, at least as Plato presents it. And one of the things he emphasized quite a bit is that it's wrong to charge money for teaching philosophy, which, of course, is an interesting idea, perhaps to this day. Sophists, they traveled a lot. They were very worldly. So they came to believe that cultures were different and what worked in them was different. So they embraced, as we're about to see, one of the first serious forms of relativism. So we have the fact that they were very interested in how they presented themselves. They wanted to use emotional appeals, clever language. They wanted to win debates. To them, appearances were as important as reality or truth. And ultimately, of course, that they come under a lot of criticism for that. They believed the truth was subservient to power. So sophistry now in our language means something superficial or possibly fallacious. They believed that everyone sought power and control and wanted to win rather than seeking the truth. I'll bump ahead to the relativism tab. Again, relativism is the belief that knowledge is determined by specific qualities of the observer, us, people, our birth, social position, etc. Simple kinds of relativism. The two basic kinds are everything either depends on culture or everything depends on the individual. That is, that relativism is even more, I guess, atomized, you might say, if it's individual. And then Protagoras, the greatest of the sophists, he believed that it is utterly impossible to form a culture-free or context-free belief. Protagoras believed that in the idea, as many of the sophists did, that the only thing that's worthwhile is not what is true, but rather what works. And it's important to fit in with your community, to adopt and work with their beliefs. Protagoras had a famous wager, which again was another type of logical game that he played to try to show that either way he would get the money. If you contemplate or think about what you might be able to figure out for this wager, we'll see a couple similar to it in future chapters. According to Protagoras, he believed, and this brings us to the topic of the essay quiz for this chapter, the view that might makes right, often called moral realism. What's right comes from who is the most powerful, cunning, or able. The people with the power and strength set the rules, determine what is right. So again, this and the coverage of this in that section of chapter 3 is what's being asked for your essay quiz. Famously, Protagoras said, humankind is the measure of all things, and that's kind of one of the most famous summaries of his relativism. That is, there is nothing that is set or established or standard or absolute beyond our understanding of it, so that we set the standard, and that is to say, since we're all different, there may be many different standards. Okay, well, I've reached much the end of this chapter as well, so let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.